So a few days out from the election, Mr. Michael Wolff is back, claiming that he has some serious revelations about Trump and Epstein. He apparently, according to him, has hundreds of hours of recordings of Jeffery Epstein talking about Trump, his relationship with Trump. There's one, he's only released 2 clips so far, 2 that I know of. One where he's talking about the inner workings of Trump's administration at the time when Trump was president, which is, I guess, supposed to show that they did have contact at that time. The other clip, I believe, was about, what was it about? Point being that if there's interesting stuff in those tapes, it hasn't really been released yet. And Michael Wolff seems to be hinting, threatening that he's going to release some kind of bombshell with this information that he has. It brings up some questions. For those of you who don't know, Michael Wolff is a writer, and I guess you could say journalist, more of a muckraker type, but a journalist nonetheless, who he kind of appeared during the Trump administration. I'm not really sure about his credentials before that. I don't remember. But when he came up, he essentially had written a book about Trump where he got a lot of access. He had a lot of access to the Trump administration, I think, by convincing them that he was going to write a positive book about them, and then ended up writing a very negative book, and they went for it. And so, you know, he's popping up in the media. Essentially, he seemed to be able to split both sides, where he was able to convince the Trump campaign enough that he was a friend that they gave him access to, you know, different people in the campaign. I believe he had interviews with Trump himself. And he also knew what the mainstream media wanted in terms of MSNBC, CNN. He knew what kinds of things they wanted to hear about Trump at the time, and he was able to give them that in the form of sound bites and interviews that he did, or just excerpts from his book, of which there were many. A lot of quotes, a lot of anecdotes from that book kind of circulated through the media. So, you know, he seemed like kind of a slimy guy the whole time. And as I recall, he dropped another book after that. Same deal. I don't quite remember what the gimmick of the second book was, but, you know, he had less access that time because the Trump administration had, you know, seen what it was that he does, and so they were obviously not happy with the negative coverage in the book. So he released something else. It didn't do as well. The first book that he released did very well. So there's a couple takeaways from this. One is that whoever this guy is, he seems to be able to get a fair amount of access, and he has ways of sort of extracting these different confessions. And he also seems kind of like a free agent. You know, he wrote his book targeted against Trump, but that appeared to be just more out of the fact that he knew that, he knew that the market was hungry for that at the time. And so, does that mean that he's really anti-Trump? Does that mean he's committed to taking Trump down in some way? Probably not. This just seems more like a guy who's savvy, right? He just sort of knows how to play the media, similar to Donald Trump, similar to a Steve Bannon or a Roger Stone. It's like that's what he traffics in, is sort of just manipulating the media. So the question is, does he really have anything that is going to damage Trump? And if he does, you know, what's the plan here? When's he going to drop it? I mean, it's the weekend before the election, and so far he has not released anything that has made a dent. Tony Hinchcliffe's Puerto Rico comments have made a much bigger dent in Trump's campaign than anything Michael Wolff has said. And so, does he have some big piece of information, some bombshell? If you have a bombshell, why would you not have dropped it already? Are you going to drop it on Monday? Are you going to drop it on Sunday night? I suppose that would make sense, right? I'm not aware of what the political calculations of a sleazeball like that or other people in the sort of political media circuit. I don't know if it is strategically prudent or imprudent to drop a bombshell the literal day before the election. Seems like maybe not. But it's also entirely possible that it's directly calculated to do that, because what he wants to do is, at the last minute, chip away at whatever momentum there is of people that are just saying, nah, fuck it, I'm going to vote for Trump. Fuck it, Trump's the one I like more. I'm going to show up and vote for him. To the extent that you can sway the sort of undecided people at the last minute, maybe discourage some people who are going to vote for Trump, or some people who were slightly unsure to make the decision for Kamala at the last minute. It's possible that the calculation is that some information about Jeffrey Epstein and Trump at the last minute is what's going to do that. That's going to be the image that lasts in people's minds through Tuesday. I think probably not. I mean, look, the chance that we're going to really learn anything about Trump and Epstein, I think, is low, because we sort of know what there is to know. If anything, if Epstein was doing interviews and recordings about Trump at that time, it probably was for blackmail purposes of some kind. He probably was doing it. That's the kind of thing that Jeffrey Epstein did. He had people on his island. He filmed them so that he would have evidence against them. He wanted to use his influence as blackmail and leverage, essentially. That was his whole project. So it would not surprise me if he did some sort of contingency plan interviews, recordings with Michael Wolff. I don't really know. I mean, if Michael Wolff is getting interviews with Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon at the time, it's like, who is this fucking guy? You know what I mean? And that's what makes it curious. And I think the thing about Trump that we all have to keep in mind, that we often forget, certainly on the whole, on the large scale, we forget, but Trump is kind of entirely meant to be a psyop. Just everything about his project is meant to confuse. It's meant to create a media spectacle, a debacle, and essentially an explosion of misinformation that is impossible to parse through. And so whatever people's opinions are of things Trump might have done when he was president, whether Trump is as bad as they say he is, whether they agree with something or disagree with something Trump said, or whatever the impression has come to be of Trump in individual people's minds, it is really important to remember that this guy is the whole thing is just sort of like a psychological experiment. The whole Trump project from the beginning of the first campaign. And this is why it has become this sort of unique animal in American history. We've never really seen anything like it, because it's a psychological experiment. And you can also view Trump through the lens with in mind that that's his tactic. His tactic is to simply confuse as many people as possible. You can sort of look at Donald Trump's entire presidency and a desire to be president in the first place as, a desire to obfuscate possible bad, damaging, or financially destructive news that was going to come out about him at some point. In other words, we look at Trump's presidency, his running for president this time in 2024 as an attempt to save his own skin from prosecution. It's entirely possible that the first time he did it, it was the same thing. Because, Jeffrey Epstein's arrest and subsequent death all happened under the Trump presidency. The idea that Trump was somehow responsible for that and not, say, Hillary Clinton goes really under the radar. And it makes you wonder what's up with that. I mean, Trump was president at the time. And yes, Bill Clinton had some kind of relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and Hillary Clinton appears to have run interference for that in at least a couple ways. But Trump has much more of a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and we know this. And it does confuse me a little bit that the people who support Trump, that doesn't budge them, because it does strike me, of all the things that you can excuse about Trump's rhetoric and behavior, the racism, the chaos, the just obvious, anti-America-ness about him, the fact that he seems to just want everything in this country that's not about him to burn, people can put all that aside. But the idea that he has a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein just feels like a fundamental contradiction of everything that Trump is supposed to represent to virtually all of the people that support him. You know, the whole proposition is that I'm somebody who's not controlled by these mechanisms of blackmail and swampiness that goes on in government. And, you know, I'm the only one who can save the country from that. And meanwhile, you know, he's probably the most compromised of anybody in the Epstein orbit. Trump is probably the most compromised. And that makes you wonder. That makes you wonder about everything that we've experienced since 2015 when he announced his run. And, you know, the fact that billionaires were using psychological operations to not just help get Trump elected, but to, again, obfuscate some of these, you know, the fact that Trump was connected to people like Jeffrey Epstein, the fact that Trump essentially is as corrupt as any person could be, you know, that there was a large campaign to throw people off of that trail. And I think I had a theory when QAnon was more popular that the entire purpose of QAnon was to turn people away from the idea that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were buddies. You know, like, because it's this whole thing focused on all of these people who are connected to Jeffrey Epstein and others. They're all demons, they're all whatever. And Donald Trump is the only one who can save us. Donald Trump is the savior in this world of, you know, the cabal, the evil cabal. And, you know, what does that sound like? That sounds like something that is meant to throw you off the trail. Something that's meant to turn you away from what's really going on. And, you know, so in that context, I think that you probably had parts of the intelligence agencies while Trump was president pushing the narrative of QAnon because they wanted to push people away from the idea that the president, not as part of some kind of shady, secret, world-controlling cabal, but simply as a corrupt, rich, gross, old white man. You know, Donald Trump was wrapped up with some of the sickest, cruelest criminals in the world. And, you know, I think it's entirely possible that the entire Trump political project has been an effort to obscure that fact and to maybe see how far a person like that can get if you throw them into the political circuit using blackmail, using all kinds of shady backroom techniques that Trump is definitely using that we don't see all the time. And that's what's coming back to the fore, in my opinion, when it comes to this stuff with Michael Wolff and Jeffrey Epstein. So, is he going to drop anything really interesting? Maybe not. He's probably a paper tiger. If he had something, he probably would have dropped it. If he's got something crazy he's going to drop on Monday, that's genius. I'm not expecting that. And we'll see. But it would be nice for someone to pull one thread of the, you know, sort of buttoned up history of Donald Trump and Epstein and everyone else. You just pull one thread there and sort of see what comes out. You know, it would be nice for us to start seeing some of the things about Donald Trump that we don't know. There's all kinds of things about him that we know, but I think there's still things that we don't know as well. And the question is, are we going to learn that because he lost this election humiliatingly? Or are we going to have to deal with at least another 4 years of obfuscation and misdirection and misinformation and just national and global confusion? Because above all, it's important to remember that that's what Donald Trump is there for. Whether it's Russian agents, Vladimir Putin, Robert Mercer, you know, whoever, Benjamin Netanyahu, that wants him there for the sake of confusing people and in many ways controlling the narratives of the media by keeping their wheels spinning. you know, it doesn't matter who is sponsoring it, because we should all be able to acknowledge at this point that that's what Donald Trump is. He's a psyop. He's a psychological operation. And so, as when you look at Trump through that lens, this new wrinkle of Jeffrey Epstein having been friends with him and communicating with him regularly while he was president, which he obviously claimed was never the case, that he stopped talking to him years ago, blah, 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 obviously a lie. But you have tapes now of Epstein saying that he was well aware of the inner workings of the Trump administration, and also that that's what the other tape was that he was one of Trump's closest friends at the time, this Epstein saying that. So again, what's that worth? I don't know. Epstein was a weird, creepy guy too. Who knows what his motivation for saying that on tape would have been. But it doesn't change the fact that the tape exists. And, you know, it could be something that's fake. Like, yeah, I don't think it is. I don't think it's likely that it would be faked. But I do think that a guy like Michael Wolff is the kind of guy who, if he felt like he could get away with faking some kind of Epstein deepfake in order to affect the election, he would do it. So I don't think it's fake, but it could be. But either way, you know, it's another wrinkle in this story of the incredible, boundless corruption of Donald Trump. And you know, hopefully we get real answers for that sooner than later, rather than, you know, putting this guy back into power where he can essentially hide the bodies wherever he wants.